The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the next installment of our webinars for .bank, Migrating to .bank. This will cover stories from banks that made the switch, and all slides can be found and downloaded at www.encirca.com/bank. I'd like to introduce you to our presenters today. First, we have Craig Schwartz, FTLD Registry Managing Director. He manages .bank and .insurance domain registries. He is also former Chief Registry Liaison with ICANN. Then we have Thomas Barrett, President of Encirca, the leading .bank registrar. Encirca was founded in 2001 in Boston, Massachusetts. This will be our agenda for today. We'll start off with a market summary, move forward into bank policies, and then finally get the stories from the bankers. Last but not least, we'll have a quick .bank activation roadmap before opening the webinar to any questions that you may have. Throughout the webinar, if you do have any, please enter them in to the GoToWebinar widget. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Craig Schwartz.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Tom, and to Encirca for hosting another webinar. We continue to be very pleased with the success of .bank to date, and it's largely due in part to partners such as Encirca that have helped do a lot of education and outreach to the banking community. With that said, by way of background, the .bank registry was launched in May of 2015, so we're about a year and a half into our launch, and we continue to talk with bankers almost on a daily basis to help educate them about both the value benefits of .bank, but also the migration process. In looking at this first slide, top reasons banks acquire .bank, there are a broad range of purposes, which could be anywhere from protecting a bank's name and its brands, which may mean simply making a defensive registration in .bank with no intent to use. Many banks that we talk to are attracted to the enhanced security that we mandate in .bank, and thus use it when they activate their .bank domain to differentiate themselves from their competitors in the marketplace. And in conversation after conversation we have with banks that have already made the switch, I think the number one story we hear is that when they're meeting with customers and or prospects and they're asked about security, they always talk about .bank, and it's something that's very easy to understand and very easy to explain. It's almost as if it's a seal of approval without it being a physical seal, and banks seem to be very appreciative of that and enjoy talking to their customers and prospects about it. It's also very common for us to hear that one of the great things about .bank being new is they were finally able to get a shorter domain name, either something more relevant to their brand, something more memorable, or perhaps just the name of their bank that they couldn't get in another domain such as .com or .net. So there are many reasons why banks acquire, and then activation is obviously a different topic. And moving on to bank by the numbers, some statistics for you today. You can see that there's been strong market penetration in the United States, and that just about 45% of all of the banks in our country have registered a .bank domain, and more often than not, most have registered a couple of names. Altogether, that's a little bit more than 5,200 .bank domain names, and we are also very actively monitoring how many of those domains are being used. And when we speak about use, it can be for a variety of purposes. It could be that the bank is serving up unique content on its .bank domain. It could be that the bank is redirecting from its .bank domain to its current perhaps .com domain until it figures out what its migration and implementation plan is. And to give you some raw numbers around those differentiators, about 500 of the 2,600 banks are currently redirecting to their existing website, and just about 300 now are serving up unique content on their .bank domains. So the move over to the space is happening, and it's an involved process that involves a lot of different internal and external stakeholders. And therefore, turning on a .bank domain versus turning on a .com or otherwise is a very different process and takes time, which is why the migration numbers are increasing. It's just going to be slower than it might be in some other less restricted domain. We just last week concluded a survey of the roughly 2,600 banks that have registered domain names to get a sense of what their thinking is and what their plans are. And as you can see, about 14.5% said they'd already launched their domain. Another 25% said they plan to launch within the next 12 months. And that about 46.6%, or about half, are still undecided, mostly due to planning and resource constraints, whether it be funding, whether it be technical resources, and there are, of course, still some banks that are trying to understand what the value proposition is and how that relates to their bank. And before we move on to the next slide, let me also add that when we've talked to the banks that migrated, we find a couple of common themes. That is when they opted to make the move. And those common themes are either the bank is in the process or has been planning on a website redesign, and what they've done is tied the implementation of their .bank domain to that website design. So when they go live with the new online presence, they do it with a .bank domain. Others have tied it to rebranding activities, and again have waited to make the splash until they announce their new brand. And then the other common theme we hear is that a bank is just coming out of a merger or acquisition process that might actually also include a name change, and thus they've been waiting to launch to conclude that operational activity. So for those of you on the phone that have acquired domains but you don't have a firm plan yet, you might want to think about tying it to some major event or activity for your bank. And for those of you that haven't yet registered, I hope that by the end of today's webinar you will be compelled to do so. So Tom, did you want to talk a little bit about where the banks are, since you made this handy dandy grid? Or
yeah, I can do that. So this is Tom Barrett from Encirca, and what we've done here is taken all of Encirca's customers and mapped them by postal code, basically, and we're going to make this a live feature on our website. And what it will allow you to do is to maybe you can drill down on this map. It'll allow you to drill down and actually see which of your competitors in your county or state have adopted .bank. So it'll give you an idea of where you stand relative to the bank across the street or elsewhere in your neighborhood. And so it's a feature we want to help present for various banks. So here's, for example, Andrew's drilling down a little bit, and you actually can drill down for your particular state or county, as I said, and we'll show you actually where the banks are in the country that have registered a .bank. Oh, by the way, we'll have a link to their current .bank website, and so it's also a way for us to help build some search engine traffic to these .bank websites. But stay tuned in the next few weeks about how we plan to roll that out.
And Tom, this is Craig. Just for clarification purposes, since this is new to me as well, are the dots on the map, are they simply domain names that have been registered by those banks, or some other status of the domain?
So there's no status here. It's simply the fact that the domain name has been registered, and we're listing the postal code on the map of the bank that registered the name. And so you'll obviously, if a bank has multiple names, you'll see a bigger cluster around that postal code. We do plan to allow banks who are not registered with Encirca to add their domain name to this map as well. So the plan is to include the entire community of .bank websites that exist.
Thank you, Tom.
So Andrew, if you want to go back to the slide presentation. So Craig, I think the next section is for you just to give a quick overview of the bank policies. For those folks who are not familiar with them, we're not going to go into too much detail, but I thought that'd be useful to do.
Sure, happy to do that, Tom. If Andrew, you could change the slide. So one of the reasons that .bank makes such a compelling marketing case for banks is the robust security that lives behind the .bank domain, and the fact that FTLD actively monitors for compliance with all of those requirements. Just to touch upon a few here, we do have a mandatory verification process to ensure that only approved organizations, in the case of a chartered banking institution, that they are chartered in their jurisdiction, that they are in good standing, and that the person requesting the domain names on behalf of the bank is actually an employee of the bank, and that the domain names that they're seeking relate to the bank's name, its trademarks, trade names or services. And I think there'll be another slide on that in a moment. Some of the security requirements include what's called DNSSEC, or Domain Name System Security Extensions. It's a method of cryptography to ensure that when a person on the internet types in Craig.bank, that person is actually being directed to the proper website and not being taken to somewhere else that they don't wish to be. We also do mandate what's called email authentication, which effectively is a means for large email service providers such as Google and Microsoft and Yahoo to deliver or not deliver your email or email purporting to be from your bank based upon certain settings that you create. Strong encryption or transport layer security, and some refer to it as SSL, is to ensure that when you're talking to your bank or when you're connecting to your bank, that it's being done in a safe and secure manner, and that those communications or those connections are not mistreated or perhaps even listened onto. So it's a safety and security mechanism. We do prohibit privacy and proxy registration services, which is effectively saying you can't hide behind a service that your domain name is registered by, and that's largely in response to requests that we've had from law enforcement around the world that if bad guys are using proxy registration services, that it makes it very hard for them, for law enforcement to track them down. And then lastly, we've got a name server requirement that all of our names must be hosted on a .bank name server, and that's to continue to be compliant with the requirements in our top-level domain. Next slide. So real quickly on name selection, our priority is to make sure that domain names are only getting into the hands of entities that have a right to them. So if you're ABC Bank and you try to register xyz.bank, you're not going to be able to register that name unless for some reason you have a trademark, a trade name, or a service mark on XYZ. It also must not be one of our reserved names. And that information is available on our website. Andrew, if we could go back one slide. Thank you. Domain names are limited to what are called alphanumeric characters, so just A through Z and 0 to 9 plus hyphens. Interesting piece of news just last month is that we did release and make available single and certain 2-letter names. And when we get to the next slide, you'll see some of those examples. And then we have some names that are not currently available. We call them common community simply because so many banks in the United States share the same exact name. And we decided that rather than having one winner and perhaps 50 losers because someone got to the name first, that we would simply take it off the market altogether. Now, what you can do is structure your name creatively. So if you're the Community Bank of Texas, you can't get community.bank, but maybe you want cbot.bank or cbt.bank. So there's a lot of flexibility to get the names that are most relevant for your bank that comply with our name selection policy. But at the end of the day, this is to ensure brand protection and, again, that domains only get into the rightful hands. Next slide. So as I just mentioned a moment ago, we recently made available 1-character and 2-letter domains. And consistent with one of the bullet points on the first slide in banks saying they were finally able to get a better domain name, you can see here some examples of banks that had very long domain names in .com and now have incredibly short domain names in .bank. These domain names do come with a premium pricing element, and it will vary, verified by the registrar that you use. So if you're interested in speaking with Encirca about what it would cost to, for example, register A.bank or UC.bank, you should contact Encirca.
Hey, Craig, this is Tom. Could you also just speak for a minute about how, if someone is eligible for a community name like Citizens or National, how they would go about requesting that reserved name be released for allocation?
Sure, good question, Tom. So we do have what's called a reserved names challenge policy process. It's available on our website at register.bank. And the way the process works is if your bank's name, for example, a Citizens Bank, and you really want Citizens, you can petition us through submitting a complaint, and it's a very simple form to complete. The complaint form is also on our website. And if you're successful in your complaint and getting, for example, Citizens removed from the list, we then will issue an RFP so anyone who's eligible for the name Citizens.bank could apply. So just to be clear, a successful complainant to have a domain name removed from the list doesn't mean it's automatically awarded to them, but it gives them a chance to compete via RFP with other eligible banks for the same name. And we've had, off the top of my head, 4 or 5 complaints to date. They've all been granted, and we've gone through an RFP process for some of those. Some are still in process at this point, but we are happy to make that process available and to award the domain names after a successful RFP.
Thanks, Craig. And if anyone out there is wondering if they are eligible for one of these names, if you come to Encirca's website, for example, to the .bank landing page and put in the name you want, we will indicate if it's a community reserved name. So if you've been thwarted getting one of these names, a year ago when the registry opened for business, or just looking now, when you check availability at your registrar, it should certainly tell you that it's community reserved, and then you can go through this challenge process to get that released. Before I jump into the stories from the bankers, I do want to remind you that if you have any questions, please place it into the GoToWebinar widget, and we'll try to answer those questions at the end. The registry, FTLD, Craig and his team have spent a lot of time interviewing some of the early adopters of .bank and trying to get an idea of the level of effort and challenges that they faced in migrating to .bank. And so we wanted to summarize some of those case studies. There's a larger list that's published at ftld.com. But we just wanted to highlight some of those here for your benefit. So if we go to the next slide, Bridge.bank is the Bridge Community Bank. This is their brand new website using .bank. And so they migrated from bridgecommunitybank.com to simply bridge.bank. And the CEO said that their main motivation for this was that this is clear that this is where the industry should be moving towards, although it's certain that adoption will take some time. Some of the lessons that the Bridge Community Bank learned when they went through their process: it took them about 5 months from start to finish. They spent a lot of time educating their employees, their tellers, so that not only did they understand the rationale for the move, but so that they could have a consistent story to their customers to explain why they're going through this change. But it also gave them the opportunity to reinforce their messaging on security for their customers' data. And they used all the various marketing channels that were available, from social media to local newspaper ads. They put something in their bank statements, and they have signage in their lobbies. Their biggest challenge was email authentication, or what we call DMARC, which is a requirement for .bank. And the reason why this can get tricky is that, I'll take Encirca as an example, my own business. We send out emails from our servers, but we also use third-party systems such as SurveyMonkey or Salesforce to also send out emails. And when you do that, in order to be compliant with DMARC, you have to make sure that you have identified the IP address of all those external systems that are sending out email on behalf of your organization. And there's probably more than you're aware of when you start to realize all the different ways that you communicate with your customers. So DMARC can be a painful process until you are good at identifying all those various different systems. So next example is the TrailWest.bank. And I particularly like what they've done here. This is a rebranding effort. So if we look at the lessons learned and the change for TrailWest, you can see that they started with www.familyofbanks.com. And so they completely rebranded their bank to be simply TrailWest.bank. And so migrating to a .bank and coupling that with this rebranding effort made a lot of sense for them. So it was a big project, obviously. They're changing all of their collateral, all their branding basically. But they were able to get it done in 4 months. There was a lot of changes marketing-wise in terms of signage, website, collateral, business cards, etc. It was an educational effort with their employees. And again, they did find that customers are trained almost to expect a .com on their website name. And so they had to, sometimes their customers didn't realize the switch to .bank. Their main lesson is make sure that your website host is able to meet the security requirements, such as TLS 1.1. Next example is lead.bank. This is one of the earliest adopters to .bank. And so their previous domain name was leadbankonline.com. They're able to shorten that to lead.bank, so a much shorter name plus branding with the banking industry. And their vice chairman provided this quote: when you're talking about small banks with seriously limited tech budgets, when you can make an improvement at the core of your operations with your clients, that's the easiest budgetary decision you can make. And so the value proposition certainly was a slam dunk for him. His effort took about 4 months to do the migration. They did create a senior level migration team with representatives throughout their organization. They used third-party vendors, so they made sure that they coordinated as early as possible with those vendors. And then again, they did the customer outreach to inform their customers about the branding change through various channels. Their tip here at the end: set up redirection from your old URL to .bank in case people are still going to that old location. Our advice is that not only do you set that up, but expect to make that permanent. So if you have a .com domain name, you'll probably always have your .com domain name, even 10 years from now. It's not something that we recommend that you let expire, even if you've migrated to .bank. Next example is choice.bank. So again, a very clean, simple brand. They went from choicebank.com to choice.bank. Bill here has kind words to say for Encirca because we did provide him with some add-on services to help him be in compliance. But Encirca certainly is willing to work with any third-party vendor that a bank is familiar with or comfortable with, or your internal IT department. So we're happy to help however you choose to fulfill that migration process. His advice is talk to the banks that have already gone through the process, involve your vendors as early as possible, and you need to do that to make sure they in fact can support .bank. They ran into an issue where their vendor could not provide the secure DNS and DMARC services, so we were able to backfill for them. But they also had to upgrade some of their customers who are using older versions of different browsers that did not support the security that .bank requires. And this is actually one of my more favorite examples, Chelsea State.bank. And the reason I like this is that their name has gone from, as you'll see on the next slide, csbonline.com to chelseastate.bank. And so the branding advantage here, I think, is pretty compelling. The advice here from Michael Willis is start using this new .bank website and email address as soon as possible. But of course, you need to keep your old addresses around for a while. But at some point, you need to pull the trigger and force customers to start using a .bank website. Some lessons learned from the Chelsea State Bank. It took them about 8 months from start to finish. They want to remind you that .bank, migrating to .bank is truly, it's not just a technical effort of moving your website, but it is a complete rebranding of your online presence. They advise to keep your old address, we advise you keep it forever. But your customers need to migrate as well, and as the previous bank mentioned, it may require some of them to upgrade their browser. They won't need to change, they can still use Firefox or Google Chrome, so they have to make sure they're using the latest version of those browsers. And the bank here also recommended FTLD's resource, a guide for leveraging .bank. And as we'll say later, there'll be a new version of that coming out in December that we recommend banks take a look at. So just to wrap this up, again, if you have any questions, now is a great chance to type them into the chat window. We'll just quickly summarize what we see as the activation roadmap for .bank. Most of you already have your domain name. In order to activate it, you need that secure DNS, which we can provide for you, or what your DNS vendor can provide for you. You need to have secure email and secure website, obviously. So that's TLS 1.1, that's DMARC. And then finally, you need to do that those marketing efforts and educational efforts, both to employees and your customers. And of course, once you've gone live, as most of you know, you need to have ongoing threat monitoring. And FTLD is doing a lot of this as well to make sure that your website presence stays secure throughout its life. So some takeaways from today. We've learned that half the banks in the U.S. already own a .bank domain name. About 14% of those have already done the migration. The main reason that banks are acquiring .bank is to protect their brand name, but also give their bank a competitive advantage over non-adopters. And that competitive advantage comes from being able to articulate a clear security message that .bank delivers versus a .com website. Involve your vendors, obviously, in your migration. Encirca is happy to help and work with those vendors. And finally, we think that this is a great opportunity to differentiate your messaging to your customers and make it clear that you're protecting their data online. So this is our final slide. We'll answer your questions. Just a few links here. If you want to read more about these success stories, please go to the .bank Registry's website, and there's some new ones that were added this week. Coming soon from the registry is a brand new planning guide that several of these banks recommend you take a look at. That's coming out in a few weeks. And then starting in December, the registry will be publishing third-party service providers that can support many of the security requirements that .bank requires. So if you're having issues with your current vendors or you don't have the skills in-house, there'll be a directory of service providers that you can take advantage of. If you have any questions, feel free to email Encirca. And as I mentioned earlier, if you want to register a domain name or check to see if that community name is available, you can go to our landing page and do that search. Andrew, I know Andrew had some sound issues, but I wonder if you can come back online and handle some of the questions.
Yep, of course, I'm here, and thank you for that, Tom and Craig. I'm going to start off with the first question. It's a bit high level. Is .bank still safe and regulated now that the U.S. turned over control to ICANN?
So this is Craig. That's a very high level question, and we could spend a whole hour just talking about that. But .bank is as safe as it was before, and the portion of the root part of the internet that's been turned over to ICANN from the U.S. government is really a small administrative function of making sure, and I call it the library of top-level domains, or the database, is kept up to date and accurate. So that change in stewardship and responsibility, I would say, has almost zero effect on .bank as a registry.
Yeah, in fact, I'll chime in. It really has zero effect on the entire internet. So it is simply an administrative change. ICANN remains in place. Its primary mission is security and stability of the internet. and that's not going to change. So I don't think there's any reason for concern there.
Awesome. Thank you. And regarding migrating to dot bank, what particular vendors need to be notified?
So Tom, if I don't mind taking the first pass at that.
Sure. Okay.
Because we talk to banks every day, and so the third-party providers are the companies that host your website, the companies that provide your online banking platform, so your core processor. You also need to engage, as Tom mentioned earlier, companies that send email on your behalf. So in the case of FTLD, we use MailChimp, we use SurveyMonkey, and for those emails to continue to work properly, you need to build them into your DMARC and your SPF policy. To the extent that you use services from a content delivery network provider like an Akamai or Cloudflare, or a security and fraud services firm like Trusteer, because those organizations are operating some of your online presence or your back-of-the-house infrastructure, they need to be part of the conversation and the planning process.
Yeah, I would just add to that, obviously involve your registrar and involve whoever provides DNS hosting for your domain name. That might be a registrar, it might be a third party.
Okay. And now we have a few questions about email authentication, otherwise known as DMARC. We find that it does sound like the most difficult part. Do either of you have any tips for how to implement DMARC alignment?
Well, I can, the DMARC is a, I don't want to get too technical, but it's something that gets added to your DNS record. And so you need to have the cooperation of your DNS vendor. It's something that we do for our customers automatically. We do recommend that you use a DMARC expert who can, because basically what DMARC is it tells folks like Google and AOL and Yahoo, hey, whenever you see an email from a particular domain name, if it has a DMARC record, then send out a report to us and let us know you received this email. So it helps in the deliverability of outgoing email from your bank to anyone who's using an email client like Gmail or AOL. But the reports that come back are fairly hard to decipher. And so there are experts out there called DMARC experts that will parse these reports and put them into a very readable, concise report. We do recommend you use one of those. We have someone we would recommend, but there are several in the marketplace. We recommend you use that. Turn on DMARC without any blocking it first, and get used to what the traffic looks like. And this helps you discover, for example, after several weeks that in fact, hey, you're using MailChimp, you're using SurveyMonkey, and you didn't have that on your list. So it allows you to make a complete list of all the senders of email for your business before you start clamping down and making it more restrictive.
Thank you, and I believe that's a perfect segue into the next question. Where can a bank find more information about the additional threat monitoring?
So yeah, I think it might be helpful first, because obviously after Craig, you can talk about the monitoring you do, which is merely for compliance with .bank, which covers a pretty good range. But then on top of that, I think your upcoming vendor directory will provide additional vendors that do more broader monitoring.
Right. So let me say a couple of points about that. The first is to ensure that all players in the .bank space are abiding by the same rules and restrictions. We do active monitoring of compliance with all of our technical requirements. And thus, I get a report every morning that will tell me these 3 banks have this particular issue, and we will send a notice to your registrar letting them know that there are the following issues, and they will work with you to resolve them. So threat detection might be a slight misnomer, and more accurately, when you're complying with all of the requirements, we say that you're operating in a trusted and more secure environment. If you're not abiding by perhaps the TLS encryption requirement, then your communications and your transactions are less secure than we would like them to be and that we mandate, and we would notify you about that. So that's the nature of our security monitoring services. We do it internally for compliance purposes and issues resolution only. And as Tom mentioned a moment ago, we are currently accepting applications from third-party providers that can be listed on our website as a provider of web hosting services or email authentication services, and a broad range. The program and the application are publicly available on our website at ftld.com. It's our news item from October 24th.
Great, thank you. Moving on into policy. Do you believe that banks will be required to use .bank in the future?
This is Craig again. That's a question that we get pretty frequently, and if I drill down a little deeper, is the question, will my regulator require it at some point? I don't know that we'll ever see that happen, although it certainly would be good for our business. But I don't think it's outside the realm of possibilities that as regulators continue to develop and put out best practices, that .bank might become part of that eventually, given the extra security that is mandated for its domains.
Yeah, and this is Tom. I would certainly add that I think that all of these security requirements that .bank requires, I do think will become mandatory by the regulatory authorities. And in fact, as many of you know, that's a moving target. They're always finding that there's some cipher suite that's no longer secure or has some sort of a way to exploit it. .bank is on top of those types of problems, and so we have several times had to upgrade .bank websites to recognize the fact that you no longer can use a particular cipher suite. And so I think by using .bank, you're more assured of staying ahead of the curve in terms of these security requirements that I think regulatory agencies will require.
We have a question with a specific regulatory agency, the ADA, that has recently brought legal cases against bank websites for being non-compliant. Does .bank have any plans in the future to work with the ADA?
I'm sorry, Andrew. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. So apparently, the ADA, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act, has found a lot of bank websites non-compliant, and the Department of Justice has been bringing lawsuits against these bank websites that are not compliant. So what we're wondering is if .bank has any vision of working with ADA compliance in the future.
So what I presume is that the ADA or the regulators finding issues with bank websites that are hosted on .com, because that's where most of them live and breathe today. We haven't specifically addressed ADA, and candidly, it's a fairly new issue that was just raised with us last week for the first time. So what I can say is that if a bank's website is required to be ADA compliant, that whether it's in .com or whether it's in .bank, it needs to play by the same standards. It's not something we've obviously built into our monitoring and enforcement because, again, it's so new. But it's clearly something that we need to look at, and we will.
Awesome, thank you. Last two questions. will be regarding Encirca. I believe it was touched upon briefly earlier. Does Encirca offer .bank compliant web hosting?
Yes, we do. So we offer all the add-on services you need to be in compliant with .bank, from email hosting to web hosting to DNSSEC to SSL certs. But again, you're not required to use us if you don't want to. We do offer those, in fact, a free service when you first register the name. But if you want to use one of your existing vendors, we're happy to walk them through the process as well to get compliant with .bank.
And this is Craig. I'm also happy to provide an endorsement for Tom and Encirca in that we use Encirca for all of our .com, our .bank, and our .insurance domains, and have been really pleased with the quality of service that we've gotten. So they are certainly a good resource to consider when you're looking for support.
Great, thank you. And so we have one question about why is the price so much higher than a .com price?
Thanks, Andrew. I'll take this, at least from the registry's perspective. And as I said early on, turning on a .bank domain versus turning on a .com domain is very, very different. And operating .bank is different than the .com registry. We have much higher costs to, for example, provide and conduct the verification process that goes into ensuring that every domain name is getting into the right hands. And we've partnered with Symantec to support us with that verification component, and that has a high price tag associated with it. The compliance monitoring system to track that all of our end users in .bank are complying with all of the security requirements was custom built by and for us, and that's a very expensive undertaking. So at a very high level, the operational costs for FTLD as a registry operator are significantly greater than a traditional domain name that everyone is used to buying, and that translates into higher prices. On the flip side, we also believe that there's a tremendous amount of value that you get out of saying you're in .bank, whether you're talking about security or whether you're using it to market your bank to a new customer, and that overall the relative price of a domain name is small in comparison to the value that you get. So a multi-tiered response to that question, but I hope that is responsive.
Awesome, thank you. And I have one final question today. Earlier on the PowerPoint, there was a slide with an interactive map of all the banks. Do we have a date for when that map will be published to the public?
This is Tom. We don't have a date yet. We're anticipating perhaps the second half of November or late November.
Okay, sounds good. And that will conclude our webinar for today. I'd like to thank everyone for joining. I'd like to thank our panelists, Tom Barrett and Craig Schwartz. Feel free to go on register.bank/success stories to read more case studies from other banks that have made the switch. Be on the lookout for their updated planning guide in early November and the third-party providers list, which will be made available December 5th. If you have any questions, Encirca is here to help. Please feel free to email us at bankhelp@encirca.com. A copy of the webinar will be found at encirca.com/bank. You can also secure your desired .bank domain name there. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.